A single button on a black phone is all it takes to freeze time for 30,000 people. Julian Smith watches the total fleet lockdown confirmation blink red against his thumb. Outside the terminal windows, massive jet engines wind down into a ghostly, unnatural silence. The rain-slicked runway, usually a hive of motion, becomes a graveyard of grounded giants. Julian slides the phone back into his charcoal hoodie, his expression as cold as the storm. Beside him, Victoria Garcia gasps, the sudden stillness of the airport echoing her own shock. She looks from the dark screens of the departure board to the man she thought she knew. The scent of expensive lilies in the lounge now feels like the heavy air of a funeral. In front of them, Marcus the supervisor still holds his smug smirk, unaware the world just stopped. Julian steps forward, the floorboards creaking under the weight of a king reclaiming his throne. Marcus taps his useless keyboard, his smirk twitching into a mask of confused frustration. The system is down, but that doesn't change the fact that you don't belong here. He sneers. He glances at Victoria's worn blazer and scoffs, signaling for the nearby security detail. We have a standard to maintain, and frankly, you're lowering the property value of this room. Victoria flinches, her eyes welling with fresh tears as she thinks of the emergency awaiting them. She reaches for Julian's hand, her fingers trembling against his steady, unyielding palm. The elite travelers nearby begin to complain, their high-priced lives interrupted by the digital blackout. Marcus ignores the chaos behind him, focusing entirely on the pleasure of demeaning Julian. This is a sanctuary for the distinguished, not a charity ward for the distressed, he adds. Julian feels a crack in his stoic armor, a fire igniting in his chest that no rain can douse. You speak of standards as if they are measured by the price of a watch, Julian says softly. His voice is a low vibration that seems to cut through the mounting panic of the terminal. Marcus laughs, a sharp metallic sound that lacks any genuine warmth or humanity. In this lounge they are. Now move or I'll have you removed by force. The supervisor gestures to two guards who are already marching toward the velvet rope. Victoria pulls at Julian's arm, her voice a desperate whisper for him to avoid the conflict. Julian, please. Let's just find another way home. We don't have time for this. But Julian knows that another way doesn't exist in a system he designed to be exclusive. He realizes that by building a wall for the rich, he trapped the woman he loves outside of it. He pulls his phone out again, not to hide it, but to brandish it like a scepter. The guards reach Julian, their hands hovering over their belts in a practiced show of force. Sir, you've been asked to leave. Do not make us escalate this, the lead guard commands. Julian doesn't move an inch, his eyes locked on Marcus's name tag, as if memorizing a target. He turns the screen of his phone outward, displaying a live biometric authorization bypass. The guard's eyes widen as he recognizes the level 0 clearance icon, something he's only seen in manuals. Across the terminal, the PA system lets out a high-pitched whine that silences the crowd. The digital boards suddenly flicker back to life, but the flight numbers are gone. In their place, 3 words scroll across every screen in the airport. Citizen 1 oversight. Marcus pales, the blood draining from his face as the term for the CEO's private protocol appears. Who are you? Marcus stammers, his bravado evaporating into thin, cold air. The lounge doors fly open, and the regional director sprints in, his silk tie flying over his shoulder. He doesn't look at the guards or the wealthy passengers. He looks only for the man in the hoodie. When he spots Julian, he skids to a halt, his knees nearly buckling on the polished marble. Mr. Smith, we received the emergency override. I had no idea you were on site. The guards instantly recoil, snapping into a rigid, terrified salute at the mention of the name. The socialites in the lounge freeze mid-sip, their champagne flutes clicking against their rings. Victoria looks at Julian, her face a mixture of betrayal and sudden, jarring realization. She knew he was powerful, but she never knew he could turn the world off with a gesture. Julian remains silent, his presence expanding until it seems to fill every corner of the vast room. He looks at the director, then slowly shifts his gaze back to the trembling Marcus. Director, this man just told me that Apex Airways is not a place for the distressed, Julian says. His voice is amplified by the silence of the room, carrying the weight of a final judgment. The director looks at Marcus, his expression shifting from terror into a mask of absolute fury. He did what? Mr. Smith, I can explain our training protocols immediately. Julian raises a hand, and the director falls silent as if his very breath had been cut off. The protocols are mine. The failure is mine, but the correction starts with him. Marcus tries to lean on the podium for support, but his hands are shaking too hard to grip. He looks at the commoner he mocked, searching for a mercy that isn't coming. Victoria steps back, the gap between her and the billionaire husband she thought she knew widening. She sees the CEO now, not the man who held her while she cried this morning. Clear the lounge, Julian commands, his eyes never leaving the supervisor's sweating face. Every passenger, every guest, every staff member, get them out of my sight. The director scurries to obey, his voice cracking as he barks orders at the confused elite. Wealthy travelers are ushered out like cattle, their protests dying under Julian's heavy stare. The guards stand at the exit, their faces pale as they bar anyone from re-entering the sanctuary. The massive space, built for hundreds, is emptied in a matter of frantic, echoing minutes. Only Julian, Victoria, and Marcus remain in the center of the hollowed-out palace of glass. The rain continues to lash the windows, the only sound in a world Julian has paralyzed. He walks behind the mahogany podium, invading the space Marcus once used as a throne. You said I didn't belong here, Marcus. Now show me how this system actually works. Julian gestures to the computer screen, which is still flashing the CEO's private override. Log in. Show me the list of every passenger you've turned away this week for poor appearance. Marcus fumbles with the keyboard, his breath coming in ragged, terrified hitches. Sir, I was following the prestige guidelines in the handbook. Julian leans down, his face inches from the man who had dared to mock Victoria's tears. Then you'll have no problem explaining those guidelines to the board during your deposition. Victoria watches from the center of the room, her silhouette small against the vast airport backdrop. She realizes Julian isn't just firing a man. He's dismantling a philosophy he helped create. But the cost of his fury is the time they are losing to reach her dying father. Julian, the plane, she whispers, her voice a fragile thread in the looming silence. Julian turns to her, his expression softening for the first time since the lockdown began. The plane isn't leaving until I know this won't happen to anyone else, Victoria. But we don't have time for a revolution, she cries, her loyalty finally clashing with his ego. Julian looks at the black phone in his hand, the power to move mountains at his fingertips. He realizes his desire to punish Marcus is competing with the very empathy he's trying to defend. If he stays to fix the company, he loses the woman. If he leaves, the monster lives on. Marcus sees the hesitation and tries to stand, a glimmer of desperate hope in his eyes. Mr. Smith, if you leave now, I can handle the restart. I can make this right. Julian's eyes snap back to the supervisor, the softness for Victoria vanishing instantly. The question isn't whether Julian will leave, it's who he will become before he does. Julian picks up the mahogany podium and shoves it, the heavy desk sliding across the floor with a screech. You're not handling anything, Marcus. You're going to sit on the floor and wait for the police. He turns to the regional director who is peeking through the glass doors with wide eyes. Get a flight crew for Ship 01, now, and tell them we are taking economy passengers first. The director stammers a yes sir and sprints off, his footsteps fading into the terminal. Julian walks back to Victoria, reaching for her hand, but she hesitates before taking it. The empathy engine of their marriage is stalled, caught in the gears of his corporate war. As they head toward the private gate, a loud crash echoes from the terminal below. A riot is brewing among the thousands of passengers trapped by Julian's ego-driven lockdown. Will Julian's attempt to save the airline's soul end up destroying the airport entirely? Julian and Victoria descend the escalator toward the private boarding gate, the air thick with tension. The terminal below is a sea of angry faces and waving arms, a riot beginning to boil. Stranded travelers hammer on the glass partitions, their shouts muffled but their fury visible. Julian keeps his arm around Victoria's waist, steering her through the chaos like a ghost in the storm. He ignores the flashes of 1,000 phone cameras capturing the man in the hoodie who broke the sky. Victoria's eyes are fixed straight ahead, her face a pale mask of grief and growing exhaustion. They reach the heavy steel doors of Gate 01, where a phalanx of security guards stands ready. The lead guard scans Julian's biometrics, and the locks disengage with a heavy, industrial thud. Beyond the door lies the jet bridge, a narrow tunnel leading to the only moving plane in the world. Will they escape the cage Julian built? Or will the angry crowd breach the gates first? Inside the jet bridge, the sound of the terminal riot fades into a low, rhythmic thumping. Julian stops Victoria just before they reach the aircraft door, turning her to face him. "I promised I would get you home, and I meant it," he says, his voice low and urgent. She looks at him, her eyes searching for the husband she married, not the king she just saw. "You stopped the world, Julian. You didn't just buy a ticket. You stopped the whole world." He tries to touch her face, but she flinches slightly, her mind still reeling from his display of power. The plane's turbines begin to whine, a high-pitched scream that vibrates through the floorboards. A flight attendant stands at the galley door, her uniform pristine, but her hands shaking visibly. "Mr. Smith, the tower is reporting a security breach at the main terminal perimeter," she says. Julian looks back at the door they just entered, hearing the first cracks of glass breaking. They step onto the luxury aircraft, but the cabin is not filled with the usual corporate elite. Instead, a dozen confused families from the economy line sit in the oversized leather seats. Julian's Humanity First directive has already begun, filling the cabin with those in the most need. A young woman clutching a crying infant looks up at Julian with a mixture of awe and terror. Victoria sees the child and finally softens, her hand finding Julian's in the dim cabin light. "You're changing the rules, aren't you?" she whispers, the first hint of a smile touching her lips. Julian nods, but his eyes remain on the cockpit door, waiting for the final clearance. The plane begins to push back from the gate, the massive wheels rolling over the rain-slicked concrete. Suddenly, the aircraft jerks to a violent halt, the cabin lights flickering into a warning red. A heavy thud echoes from the cargo hold below, followed by the sound of frantic scratching. "What was that?" Victoria asks, her grip on Julian's hand tightening until it hurts. The pilot's voice crackles over the intercom, sounding breathless and deeply concerned. "Sir, we have a problem. Someone has bypassed the ground security and is clinging to the landing gear." Julian moves to the window, shielding his eyes to peer through the lashing rain and darkness. Below, he sees a man in a tattered airport uniform. It's Marcus, the supervisor he just fired. Marcus is screaming into the wind, his eyes wild with a cocktail of desperation and vengeful spite. He has jammed a metal luggage rod into the hydraulic seals of the nose gear, locking the plane. The ground crew stands back, afraid to approach the man who has nothing left to lose. Julian realizes Marcus isn't trying to escape. He's trying to ensure Julian never leaves the ground. The question is, how far will Julian go to remove the man he personally broke? Julian turns to the head of his security detail, his face hardening into a mask of pure steel. "Get him off my plane!" Julian commands, his voice cold enough to freeze the humid cabin air. "Sir, the hydraulics are pressurized. If we move him forcibly, the gear could collapse," the guard warns. Victoria stands up, her empathy for even the most wretched human being flaring into life. "Julian, he's terrified. You took his life away in 10 minutes. What did you expect?" "I expected him to be a human being, Victoria, not a saboteur," Julian roars back. The passengers in the cabin shrink into their seats, terrified by the CEO's sudden outburst of rage. Julian looks at the woman he loves and realizes his anger is driving a wedge between them again. He sees the reflection of a tyrant in the dark windows of the plane, and it sickens him. He unbuckles his seatbelt, heading for the stairs that lead down to the tarmac. The rain drenches Julian the moment he steps onto the metal air stairs, his hoodie soaking through. He walks toward the nose of the plane, the wind whipping the scent of jet fuel into his lungs. Marcus is huddled against the giant tire, the metal rod still wedged deep into the machinery. "Get back!" Marcus screams, his voice cracking as he stares at the most powerful man he knows. "I'm not going to jail alone, Smith. If I go down, this whole airline goes down with me." Julian stops 5 feet away, his hands raised in a gesture that is half peace, half-calculated trap. The blue airport lights strobe across Marcus's face, highlighting the madness in his eyes. "You think this is about a job, Marcus? This is about the fact that you're a coward," Julian shouts. Marcus lunges forward, swinging a heavy wrench he had hidden in his jacket at Julian's head. Julian ducks, the metal whistling inches above his hair, and the fight for the airline begins. The two men grapple in the mud and oil beneath the belly of the billion-dollar aircraft. Julian's refined world of boardrooms and balance sheets vanishes, replaced by raw, primal survival. He feels Marcus's teeth sink into his shoulder, a sharp pain that sends adrenaline through his veins. Julian throws a heavy punch, connecting with Marcus's jaw and sending the man sprawling into the rain. The guards move in to intervene, but Julian waves them off, his pride demanding a personal victory. He stands over the fallen supervisor, his breath coming in ragged, steaming gasps in the cold air. "Is this the distinguished guest treatment you were talking about?" Julian asks, wiping blood from his lip. Marcus groans, his spirit finally breaking as he looks up at the shadow of the plane looming over him. But as Julian turns to walk away, Marcus reaches for the hydraulic release lever on the landing gear. If Marcus pulls it, the entire front of the plane will crush both of them instantly. "Don't do it!" Julian yells, freezing in place as Marcus's hand wraps around the red lever. Up in the cabin, Victoria is pressed against the glass, her scream lost in the roar of the wind. The hydraulic fluid begins to hiss, a high-pitched warning that the system is under extreme pressure. Marcus looks at Julian, a twisted, pathetic smile forming on his blood-stained lips. "You wanted to see how the system works, boss? This is how it ends for people like me." Julian realizes that his desire to humiliate Marcus has led them to this suicidal standoff. He has a split second to decide: keep his distance and save himself, or dive in to save a monster. He lunges forward, his hands closing over Marcus's wrists just as the metal begins to groan. The two men are locked in a desperate struggle, the weight of the aircraft hovering inches above. Will Julian's last act be a sacrifice for a man he hates, or a final fatal mistake? With a roar of effort, Julian yanks Marcus's hands away from the lever and throws him clear. The landing gear settles with a deafening metallic clang, but the seals hold, and the plane stays upright. Julian lies on the wet concrete, his chest heaving as the security team finally swarms the area. They pin Marcus to the ground, zip-tying his hands behind his back as he weeps into the puddles. Julian stands up slowly, his body aching and his charcoal hoodie ruined beyond repair. He looks up at the window where Victoria was watching, but the glass is now dark and empty. A cold dread settles in his stomach, worse than the fear of the plane crushing him. He sprints back up the stairs, his boots clattering on the metal as he enters the cabin once more. Victoria is standing by the door, her bags packed, her eyes filled with a cold, hard resolve. "I can't go with you, Julian," she says. Her voice is steady as the rain outside. Julian freezes, the blood from his lip dripping onto the expensive carpet of the aircraft. "What are you saying? The plane is ready. We have to go to your father," he pleads. "I'm going to my father, but I'm taking a different flight," she says, gesturing to the terminal. "You've become the thing you hate, Julian. You're playing God with people's lives to prove a point." She walks past him, her shoulder brushing his as she heads for the jet bridge they just left. Julian reaches out to stop her, but his hand drops as he sees the economy passengers watching. They aren't looking at him with gratitude anymore. They are looking at him with fear. He has the power, the plane, and the empire, but he is standing in the cabin completely alone. As the doors of the aircraft finally hiss shut, Julian realizes the point of no return wasn't a gate. It was the moment he decided that his pride was more important than the woman he loves. The aircraft engines roar with a lonely intensity as the jet bridge retracts like a severed limb. Julian stands by the cockpit door, his knuckles raw, and his charcoal hoodie stained with oil. Through the thick plexiglass, he watches Victoria's retreating figure vanish into the terminal's neon glow. The economy passengers in the first-class cabin sit in a stunned, suffocating silence, watching their benefactor. A small boy in seat 2A reaches out, offering Julian a crumpled paper napkin for his bleeding lip. Julian takes it, the simple gesture of a child cutting through his layers of corporate armor. He realizes he is the pilot of a ghost ship, carrying a cargo of strangers toward an uncertain horizon. "Get us in the air," Julian commands the pilot, his voice cracking with a sudden sharp grief. He sinks into the plush captain's chair at the front of the cabin, the leather cold and unforgiving. The plane lurches forward, finally claiming the sky, but Julian has never felt more grounded. The ascent is steep and silent, the lights of the city flickering out beneath a blanket of clouds. Julian opens his black phone, the screen reflecting 1,000 unread alerts from the global board of directors. They are demanding explanations for the lockdown, threatening to strip him of his title by dawn. He ignores the legal threats, scrolling instead to the internal manifest of the passengers on board. He sees the names of people who were ignored, mocked, and pushed aside by his own creation. There is a teacher, a nurse, and a man traveling for a heart transplant, all once deemed unworthy. Julian realizes that this flight is his laboratory, his one chance to prove a new way to lead. He stands up, turning to the cabin, his presence demanding the attention of every weary traveler. "Tonight the rules of the sky are changing," he announces, the cabin lights warming to a soft amber. But in the back of his mind, the question remains: can he fix an empire he's already lost his heart to? He begins to move through the cabin, not as a CEO, but as a man seeking redemption. He listens to the teacher talk about her students and the nurse describe her grueling 30-hour shifts. With every story, the weight of his prestige guidelines feels more like a criminal indictment. He uses his phone to authorize life-changing credits and upgrades for every person in the room. The atmosphere shifts from one of fear to a cautious, electric sense of hope and wonder. The empathy engine is finally turning, fueled by the raw honesty of those he once considered invisible. However, a red light begins to pulse on the bulkhead, drawing Julian's eyes to the cockpit door. The head flight attendant approaches him, her face ashen and her voice a frantic, low whisper. "Mr. Smith, we've just received a signal from the ground. It's about the aircraft's maintenance logs." Julian's heart sinks as he realizes the sabotage Marcus attempted might have gone deeper than the gear. "Speak clearly, Sarah. What did the ground crew find?" Julian demands, his eyes narrowing. "Marcus didn't just jam the hydraulics, sir. He accessed the fuel management system's digital core." The plane gives a subtle, sickening shudder, the floor vibrating with an uneven, coughing rhythm. On the digital display in the galley, the fuel levels begin to drop at an impossible, terrifying rate. Julian realizes they are leaking the lifeblood of the aircraft into the dark Atlantic sky. The promise of the premise, a world of kindness, is now threatened by a very literal catastrophe. He looks at the families he just promised a new life, their faces now glowing with newfound joy. If the engines flame out over the ocean, their hope will become their tomb in the deep. Julian sprints toward the cockpit, his mind racing through the emergency protocols he wrote himself. Can he outsmart the digital ghost Marcus left behind before the sky claims them all? Inside the cockpit, the flight deck is a Christmas tree of warning lights and blaring audio alarms. "We're losing pressure in the main feed," the pilot shouts over the roar of the wind. The ocean below is a black void, offering no sanctuary for a plane with failing hearts. Julian leans over the center console, his fingers dancing across the override keys with surgical precision. He tries to isolate the leak, but the software Marcus corrupted is fighting back like a virus. The system demands a manual physical reset from the mid-cabin access panel under the floorboards. Julian knows the panel is located directly beneath the seats of the family with the crying child. He has to move them, reveal the danger, and cause a panic that could tip the plane into a stall. "Keep her level," Julian orders. "I'm going down into the belly of the beast." He grabs a heavy mag light and a wrench, his suit jacket discarded on the cockpit floor. He returns to the cabin, trying to maintain a mask of calm as the plane begins to tilt slightly. The passengers notice the change in pitch, their conversations dying out as they look to Julian. He reaches the family in 2A, kneeling beside the young mother whose child is finally asleep. "I need you to move to the back of the cabin." Quietly and quickly, Julian whispers. She looks into his eyes and sees the life-or-death truth he is trying so hard to hide. She nods, gathering her child and her belongings without a single word of protest or fear. Julian rips up the luxury carpeting, exposing the cold industrial steel of the access hatch. He heaves it open, and the roar of the wind beneath the floor fills the cabin like a scream. The passengers gasp, the illusion of safety shattering as the cold air rushes into the pressurized space. Julian drops into the dark hole, his life hanging by the strength of his own two hands. Beneath the floor, Julian is surrounded by a maze of hissing pipes and sparking electrical looms. The smell of jet fuel is overpowering, a toxic mist that stings his eyes and clogs his throat. He finds the fuel manifold, where a digital valve is twitching erratically, bleeding fuel into the void. He reaches for the manual bypass lever, but it's jammed shut by a piece of Marcus's metal rod. Julian strains against the iron, his muscles screaming and his breath coming in ragged gasps. The plane lurches violently to the left as one engine begins to sputter and cough in the dark. "Come on, you piece of junk!" Julian screams, his boots slipping on the fuel-slicked metal. He feels the vibration of the failing engine through the very frame of the aircraft. With a final, desperate surge of strength, he kicks the rod free, his shin slicing open in the process. The lever snaps into place and the hissing stops, replaced by a haunting, temporary silence. Julian climbs back into the cabin, drenched in fuel and blood, looking like a man returned from war. The passengers are huddled in the back, watching him with wide, terrified eyes as he seals the hatch. He limps toward the cockpit, giving a short, sharp nod to Sarah, the flight attendant. "We have enough fuel to reach the nearest coast, but it's going to be a rough ride," he says. He picks up the intercom, his voice shaking but filled with an undeniable, raw authority. "We've had a mechanical issue, but we are under control. You are safe on this aircraft." The passengers let out a collective sob of relief, the tension breaking like a fever in the cabin. Julian sinks into his seat, his body trembling with the aftershocks of the adrenaline surge. He looks at his phone, which is now vibrating with a single, private incoming text message. It's from Victoria. "I'm watching the news. Julian, what have you done?" Julian stares at the screen, the words, "What have you done?" echoing the chaos he's unleashed. The news is reporting a high-altitude hijacking by the CEO of Smith Global himself. The board has officially declared him mentally unfit, and 2 fighter jets are being scrambled to intercept. Julian looks out the window and sees the faint, blinking strobes of military aircraft on the horizon. His attempt to save the souls of his passengers has made him a target for the very government he serves. He realizes that the promise of the premise isn't a gift. It's a battle he has to fight. He looks at the families in the back, knowing he is their only shield against the coming storm. The fighter jets pull alongside, their cockpits glowing with the lethal intent of their pilots. "Ship 01, this is the Air National Guard. Divert to the nearest military base or we will engage." Julian looks at the radio, then at the innocent faces in his cabin and makes a final choice. "This is Julian Smith," he says into the radio, his voice steady even as the jets lock their targets. "I have 12 civilians on board, and I am not diverting until they are safely home." The massive jet rolls with a groan of protesting metal, diving into a wall of black thunderheads. The F-15s bank sharply, but the turbulence in the clouds is a chaotic soup of lightning and ice. Julian feels the stomach-churning drop as the aircraft is tossed by a violent, unseen hand. "Sir, we're losing our navigation array," the pilot shouts, fighting the vibrating control yoke. Lightning arcs across the nose of the plane, illuminating the terrified faces of the families behind them. Julian grabs the intercom, his voice a steady anchor in the middle of the screaming wind. If you are moved by Julian's fight, please like and subscribe to follow his journey to justice. Comment below with the name of the country you are watching this story from right now. He knows the only way to survive is to turn the eyes of the world into his personal shield. The video feed from the cabin begins to upload to every server on the planet simultaneously. The live stream explodes, the comment section a blur of flags from Brazil, Japan, and the UK. Millions are now watching the man in the hoodie fight for his life against his own military. The board of directors watches in horror as the narrative shifts from madman to martyr in seconds. Julian sees the F-15s peel away, their commanders unwilling to commit murder on a global stage. He wipes the sweat from his brow, but the relief is short-lived as the cockpit door bursts open. Sarah, the flight attendant, is pale, pointing a shaking finger toward the back of the aircraft. "Mr. Smith, there's a passenger. He says he has a message from the board's chairman." Julian pushes past her, his blood-stained sneakers silent on the carpet as he reaches the tail. A man in a sharp suit, who Julian hadn't noticed during the chaos, stands by the emergency exit. He holds a small black detonator, his thumb resting on the trigger with a terrifying calm. "Julian, you should have just taken the payout and stayed in the lounge," the man says softly. He is Elias, the board's chief fixer, a man Julian himself hired for his most ruthless tasks. Elias looks at the families cowering in the seats, his expression devoid of any human flicker. "The chairman can't have you testifying about the prestige slush funds, even if the world is watching." Julian realizes the leak in the fuel line wasn't just Marcus. It was a coordinated strike. The fixer raises the detonator, his eyes locked on Julian's with the coldness of a professional. "One click, Julian, and the Humanity First experiment becomes a very public tragedy," Elias whispers. Victoria's voice suddenly crackles through the plane's internal comms, routed from the ground. "Julian, the fixer's phone is linked to a secondary server. Don't let him move his thumb." Julian lunges not for the man's throat but for the cell phone tucked in the fixer's pocket. The two men collide near the galley, the plane tilting as it hits a massive pocket of air. Julian's fingers brush the cold glass of the fixer's phone, his mind racing through the code. Elias slams Julian against the bulkhead, the detonator's red light blinking with a steady, lethal pulse. "You're a visionary, Julian, but you forgot that empires are built on secrets, not kindness," Elias sneers. Julian feels the sting of a hidden blade as Elias draws a ceramic knife, slicing Julian's arm. The passengers scream as blood splatters the white leather of the first-class interior. Julian ignores the pain, his hand finally closing around the fixer's phone and pulling it free. He uses his own device to beam a kill signal directly into the fixer's communication array. The detonator in Elias's hand lets out a high-pitched whine and goes dark, its signal fried. Elias looks at the useless plastic in his hand, his mask of calm finally shattering into a jagged panic. Julian doesn't wait for a second chance. He delivers a crushing blow that sends Elias to the floor. The guards he brought for security finally move in, pinning the fixer against the cargo door. Julian stands over him, his breath coming in ragged, bloody gasps as he looks at the camera. "Did you see that?" Julian asks the millions watching the stream, his voice raw with fury. "This is the prestige my board is willing to kill for. They want you to stay in your place." The comment section is a wildfire of rage, the world demanding the heads of the Smith Global Board. But the victory is hollow as the plane's remaining engine lets out a final, dying metallic scream. The aircraft lurches violently, the nose dipping toward the churning, dark Atlantic waves below. The midpoint twist has arrived. Julian has won the war for the truth but lost the battle for the sky. "Brace for impact!" The pilot's voice screams over the PA, the ocean rising to meet them. Julian sprints back to Victoria's seat, or where she should have been, and grabs his phone. He manages to hit the send button on a pre-written file containing every board member's secret account. The file uploads just as the first wave of spray hits the cockpit windows, blinding the pilots. He falls into the seat next to the young mother, grabbing the child's hand to steady them both. "I've got you," he whispers, though he isn't sure if he's talking to the child or his own soul. The plane hits the water with the force of a concrete wall, the sound of tearing metal deafening. Silence follows, a heavy, watery quiet that feels like the end of the world for the CEO. Julian opens his eyes to see the cabin filling with salt water, the moonlight filtering through the cracks. He sees a shadow moving in the water outside. It's not a shark, but a rescue swimmer's light. But then he notices the shadow has a gun, and it's pointed directly at his chest through the glass. The rescue team isn't here to save the passengers. They are a private tactical unit sent to finish the job. Julian realizes the board has one more move. "Rescue gone wrong" is an easy headline to sell. He looks at the mother and child who are struggling to unbuckle their belts as the water rises. He has to choose: use his last strength to fight the diver, or save the innocent people beside him. He dives into the rising tide, his lungs burning as he swims toward the emergency latch. He kicks the door open, the rush of water pinning him against the frame like a butterfly on a needle. He pushes the mother and child toward the surface, seeing their silhouettes disappear into the light. As he turns to face the diver, he sees a second figure appear, wrestling the assassin's gun away. It's a woman in a wetsuit, her movements fluid and lethal. It's Victoria, who didn't take the other flight. She had used Julian's private emergency chopper to follow the plane the moment she saw the jets. Victoria drags Julian to the surface, the cold Atlantic air hitting his lungs like 1,000 needles. They bob in the waves, surrounded by the wreckage of the empire Julian spent a decade building. The mother and child are safe on a life raft nearby, their faces lit by the searchlights of the chopper. Victoria holds Julian's head above the water, her eyes fierce even in the freezing dark. "I told you I was going to my father," she shouts over the wind, "but I never said I was leaving you." Julian looks at her, the CEO finally dead and the man finally truly alive in the middle of the ocean. But as they are hoisted toward the chopper, Julian sees a final terrifying sight on his waterproof phone. A new alert. Smith Global Headquarters set on fire. All evidence of prestige funds destroyed. The board has burned the house down to hide their tracks, leaving Julian with nothing but his life. Will he spend the rest of his days as a fugitive, or will he rebuild from the ashes of the sea? Julian clings to the rescue hoist, his body trembling as the chopper pulls them from the freezing brine. Below, the last fragment of the tail section slips beneath the waves, taking his old life with it. Victoria wraps a thermal blanket around him, her hands steady but her eyes fixed on the horizon. "They think you died in the crash, Julian. Let them keep thinking that for a while," she says. He looks at the tablet in the chopper's cockpit, seeing the news of the headquarters fire. The board has deleted him, incinerated his proof, and is already naming a successor to his throne. He is a king with no country, soaking wet and bleeding in the back of a stolen helicopter. He realizes he has nothing left but the woman beside him, and the truth he managed to upload. "We aren't going to her father's yet," Julian whispers, his voice rasping with salt and determination. "We're going to the one place the board thinks I would never dare to hide." The helicopter touches down on a rusted private helipad in the industrial heart of New Jersey. Julian limps into a dilapidated warehouse, the smell of grease and stagnant water replacing the scent of lilies. This was his first workshop, a place forgotten by the corporate auditors and the board's assassins. Victoria locks the heavy iron doors, her thermal blanket discarded for a tactical jacket. Julian collapses against a stack of mothballed server racks, his breath hitching in the cold air. The glory of the sky is gone, replaced by the damp reality of a man living in a tomb. He pulls out his cracked phone, but the screen remains black, his accounts frozen and his identity erased. The news on a small flickering TV nearby announces his tragic death at sea. Julian looks at his reflection in a shard of glass. He is a ghost in his own empire. The downward spiral has begun, and the bottom is nowhere in sight. Victoria brings a first aid kit, her hands trembling as she cleans the deep gash on Julian's arm. "We have no money, no legal standing, and the police are looking for a hijacker's body," she says. Julian winces as the antiseptic stings, but the physical pain is nothing compared to the loss of his mission. He watches the TV as the board chairman, a man named Sterling, gives a fake, tearful eulogy. Sterling announces a return to traditional values, which Julian knows is code for more elitism and greed. Every person Julian tried to save on that plane is being discredited as an accomplice by the media. The Humanity First movement is being rebranded as a cult-like terrorist act in real time. Julian feels the weight of failure pressing down on his chest, a suffocating blanket of regret. "I didn't just lose the company, Victoria. I ruined the lives of everyone who believed in me." He turns away from her, staring into the dark corners of the warehouse where his dreams once lived. A sudden, sharp, metallic banging echoes against the warehouse's corrugated metal walls. Julian freezes, his hand instinctively reaching for a heavy iron pipe on the floor. "Did they follow the chopper?" Victoria whispers, drawing a small flare gun from her belt. Shadows move past the frosted high-altitude windows, the silhouettes of tactical gear visible in the moonlight. It isn't the police. These are private cleaners hired to ensure the ghost stays dead. A flashbang grenade shatters the silence, filling the room with a blinding white light and a deafening roar. Julian is thrown backward, his ears ringing as the front doors are kicked off their hinges. The cleaners move with lethal efficiency, their laser sights cutting through the smoke and dust. "Secure the girl. Terminate the target." A voice barks through a tactical headset. Julian scrambles behind a row of steel cabinets, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The warehouse becomes a playground of shadows and lead as the first shots whistle through the air. Julian isn't a soldier, but he knows this building better than the men trying to kill him. He reaches for a master control lever on the wall, a relic from the days this place was a factory. With a roar of ancient machinery, a heavy overhead crane swings into motion, catching a cleaner by surprise. The man is swept off his feet, his rifle firing uselessly into the ceiling as he is pinned against a pillar. Victoria fires a flare, the brilliant red phosphorus blinding the remaining two assassins. Julian lunges from the shadows, tackling the lead cleaner and wrestling for the suppressed handgun. They roll across the concrete, Julian's raw desperation clashing against the man's professional coldness. He feels a boot strike his ribs, the air leaving his lungs in a painful, ragged gasp. Can a man who built an empire of glass survive a fight in the dirt? Julian manages to pin the assassin's arm, his thumb pressing into a nerve cluster with frantic strength. The gun clatters away, sliding into the darkness beneath a derelict jet engine. The cleaner snarls, reaching for a combat knife, but Victoria is there, the flare gun pressed to his temple. "Drop it or I'll burn your eyes out," she says, her voice as hard as the steel around them. The man freezes, sensing the absolute resolve in the woman who was supposed to be a distraction. Julian stands up, his hoodie torn and his face smeared with grease and blood. He realizes that Sterling won't stop until there is nothing left but ash and silence. The downward spiral has reached its lowest point. Julian is now a killer in waiting. He picks up the fallen handgun, the weight of the weapon feeling heavy and wrong in his palm. "Who sent you?" Julian asks, his voice a low, terrifying growl that surprises even Victoria. The cleaner only sneers, a blood-toothed grin that suggests he's already accepted his fate. "Sterling sends his regards. He said to tell you the first class is closed for good." Julian realizes that his mercy is being used as a weapon against him by men with none. He looks at Victoria, seeing the fear in her eyes, not of the assassins, but of the man Julian is becoming. He lowers the gun, his hands shaking as the adrenaline begins to fade into a hollow, cold ache. "Tie him up," Julian says, turning his back on the man he almost murdered. They retreat further into the warehouse, the sound of more sirens wailing in the distance. The police are coming, but they aren't coming to save them. They are coming to finish the board's work. Julian finds an old emergency tunnel, a secret exit he installed years ago for a different kind of crisis. They disappear into the earth just as the warehouse is flooded with searchlights and shouting men. They emerge in a dirty alleyway miles away, the rain finally stopping as the sun begins to rise. Julian looks at his hands, which are stained with the grease of his past and the blood of his present. They have no home, no money, and the entire world thinks they are dead or dangerous. Victoria leans against a brick wall, her face pale in the gray light of a New Jersey morning. "What now, Julian? We can't keep running like this. We're losing ourselves." Julian looks at a discarded newspaper on the ground, the headline mocking him with his own name. He realizes that to beat a man like Sterling, he cannot be the CEO or the Ghost. He must become something the board never expected, a common man with nothing to lose. "We're going to the economy terminal," Julian says, a new, quiet fire in his eyes. The downward spiral is over. Now the only way is up, through the very people he once ignored. Julian and Victoria sit on a plastic bench in the crowded, neon-lit lobby of a public bus station. He pulls the tattered charcoal hoodie low over his eyes, hiding the bruises that tell the story of his fall. Around them, the distressed masses Marcus once mocked are the only ones offering a seat or a kind nod. A tired construction worker shares his thermos of coffee with Julian, unaware he is serving a fallen king. Victoria watches the human exchange, her hand resting gently on Julian's knee as the morning sun breaks. "They aren't just your customers, Julian. They are your army," she whispers, her voice filling with a new light. Julian looks at the worker's calloused hands and realizes he doesn't need a boardroom to lead a revolution. He pulls out a burner phone he scavenged. Its screen cracked, but the wireless signal strong and steady. The first glimmer of hope isn't a billion-dollar investment. It's a single, honest message to the people. He begins to record a video, not as a CEO, but as the man who sat in the dirt with them. The video starts with Julian's face, raw and unedited, illuminated by the flickering bus station lights. "My name is Julian Smith, and the reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated by those who fear the truth." He details the prestige slush funds and the names of the board members who ordered the flight's destruction. Within minutes, the bus station's commuters start looking at their phones, then slowly, they look at him. The air in the station shifts from exhaustion to an electric, buzzing energy of recognition and defiance. The construction worker stands up, his eyes wide as he realizes the homeless man is the billionaire martyr. "They're lying about you on the news, aren't they?" the man asks, his voice booming across the terminal. Julian stands to meet him, his stature returning as he feels the collective strength of the crowd. "They're lying about all of us," Julian responds, and for the first time, he isn't standing alone. A teenager in the back starts a live stream, the hashtag #MaringuSkyJustice beginning to trend across every continent. Suddenly, the station's arrivals board flickers, replaced by a live broadcast from Smith Global HQ. Chairman Sterling appears on the screen, looking rattled as he tries to maintain the corporate narrative. "These leaks are deep fakes generated by extremists," Sterling shouts, his voice echoing through the bus terminal. But the people in the station aren't looking at the screen. They are looking at the man standing among them. A local police officer enters the station, his hand on his holster, looking for the fugitive Julian Smith. The construction worker and 3 other men step in front of Julian, forming a human wall of blue-collar grit. "He's one of us today, officer. You'll have to go through the whole station to get him," the worker says. The officer hesitates, his own phone buzzing in his pocket with a text from his wife about the live stream. He looks at the crowd, then at Julian, and slowly lowers his hand from his weapon in a silent truce. The glimmer of hope is becoming a flame, spreading from the bus station to the very gates of the city. Julian turns to Victoria, the fire in his eyes finally matching the strength she always knew he possessed. "We're not running anymore, Victoria. We're going back to where this started, to the airport." She smiles, the first real smile in days, and hands him the keys to a truck donated by a supporter. The road to the final confrontation is paved with the courage of the people the board once ignored. But as they pull out of the station, Julian's phone pings with a terrifying, high-priority encrypted image. It's a photo of Marcus, the supervisor, sitting in a dark room with a sniper rifle aimed at a crowded gate. Sterling has sent one final distinction to ensure the protest at the airport ends in a bloodbath. The board is planning to frame Julian's followers for a tragedy to regain control of the narrative. "We have to stop Marcus before the crowd gathers," Julian says, his foot hitting the gas pedal. Will Julian save the people who just saved him, or is the board's trap already closing? The airport is a fortress of sirens and steel, surrounded by thousands of protesters in hoodies. Julian drives the donated truck through a side maintenance fence, the metal screeching as it yields. Victoria checks the GPS coordinates of the encrypted photo, pointing toward the old air traffic tower. "Marcus is up there. He's waiting for the crowd to breach the main doors," she warns. Julian looks at the terminal entrance, where the board's private security is leveling their weapons. If Marcus fires the first shot, the guards will open fire on the innocent families below. Julian leaps from the truck, his boots hitting the tarmac with the weight of a final judgment. He doesn't head for the cameras or the crowd. He heads for the shadows of the tower. "Wait for my signal to go live," Julian says, handing his phone to Victoria with a steady hand. He begins the climb, his muscles screaming as he scales the exterior ladder into the wind. The wind at the top of the tower is a freezing roar that threatens to tear him from the iron. Julian reaches the observation deck, seeing the silhouette of Marcus crouched behind a long-range rifle. The supervisor's eyes are fixed on the scope, his finger twitching over the cold curve of the trigger. "You shouldn't have come back, Julian. Some of us like the view from the top," Marcus spits. Julian steps onto the platform, the glass beneath his feet vibrating with the roar of the protesting crowd. The view is different when you're looking at the people you've stepped on, Marcus, Julian replies. Marcus spins the rifle around, the barrel now leveled directly at Julian's blood-stained chest. The two men stand on the edge of the abyss, the fate of the airline hanging on a heartbeat. Below, the crowd lets out a deafening cheer as they see Julian's silhouette against the gray sky. Marcus sneers, his thumb flicking the safety off as he prepares to end the revolution. Sterling promised me my old job back if I put a bullet in the man who broke the system. Marcus screams over the wind, his face a mask of desperate, elitist rage and ruined pride. Julian doesn't flinch, stepping into the line of fire to shield the thousands of people below. Sterling is in a boardroom, Marcus. He's already written you off as a tragic lone gunman. Julian reaches into his pocket, pulling out a small recording device he found in the warehouse. It plays the audio of Sterling ordering the cleaners to terminate Marcus once the job was done. The supervisor freezes, the cold reality of corporate betrayal hitting him harder than any physical blow. The rifle trembles in his hands as he realizes he is just another distressed passenger to the board. They were going to kill you too, Julian says softly, extending a hand in a final risky piece. Marcus looks at the hand, then at the rifle, his world collapsing into a pile of lies. Suddenly, the tower door kicks open, and Elias, the fixer, appears with a silenced pistol. Enough talk. The chairman wants this theater finished before the stock market opens. Elias roars. He fires a shot that grazes Julian's side, the force of the impact sending him to one knee. Marcus screams and dives for Elias's legs, the rifle clattering uselessly across the metal floor. The two employees of the old empire grapple at the edge of the railing, their shadows dancing. Julian struggles to stand, his hand clutched over the burning wound in his ribs as he watches. Elias manages to kick Marcus away and raises his pistol to finish the CEO once and for all. Victoria's voice suddenly booms through the tower's PA system, amplified by the ground crew's speakers. The world is watching, Elias. You're on every screen in the terminal and every phone on Earth. The red on-air light on the tower's emergency camera flickers to life, capturing the assassin's face. Elias hesitates for a split second, his professional mask cracking under the weight of global scrutiny. That second is all Julian needs to lunge forward, tackling the fixer into the glass observation window. The glass shatters into a million diamond-like shards, the wind rushing in with a deafening, violent howl. Julian and Elias are pinned against the frame, thousands of feet above the concrete tarmac below. Elias loses his grip on the pistol, the weapon falling into the void like a stone into a well. Julian holds onto the frame with one hand, his other hand gripping Elias's collar to keep him from falling. I won't let you fall because you're going to tell the world exactly what Sterling did, Julian gasps. Marcus crawls toward them, grabbing Julian's belt to help pull the two men back from the edge. The three men, once divided by rank and hatred, are now huddled together in the broken tower. The final confrontation has ended not with a shot, but with a terrifying shared moment of humanity. Below, the airport security guards see the live feed of their CEO, saving the man who tried to kill him. They lower their weapons, refusing to fire on the crowd that is now weeping and cheering in unison. The terminal doors are opened, not by force, but by a staff member who has finally had enough. Victoria sprints across the tarmac toward the base of the tower, her heart hammering in her chest. Julian watches her from above, a ghost no more, but a leader forged in the fires of the street. The board's power has evaporated, replaced by the unstoppable will of the economy class. Julian looks at Marcus and Elias, the two broken tools of a dead system, and sees his first task. The airline doesn't belong to me anymore, Julian whispers to the wind. It belongs to them. He begins the long walk down the stairs to meet the woman who never gave up on his soul. But as he reaches the ground, the sound of a distant private jet engine begins to roar. Sterling is attempting a final escape, taxied by a skeleton crew on the far side of the runway. Julian sees the luxury craft moving toward the takeoff line, carrying the stolen millions and the secrets. Not on my watch, Julian says, grabbing a ground crew radio and a high-speed tug vehicle. He races across the concrete, Victoria jumping into the passenger seat as they chase the accelerating jet. The tug isn't fast enough to catch a plane, but Julian isn't trying to outrun the chairman. He swerves in front of the jet's path, forcing the pilot to slam on the emergency brakes or crash. The jet screeches to a halt, the smell of burning rubber filling the air as the nose dips forward. Julian climbs the boarding stairs, his presence a silent wall of justice that even Sterling can't ignore. The door opens, and the chairman stands there, his face a mask of terrified, impotent arrogance. "You're in the wrong place, Sterling," Julian says. "This flight is canceled." Julian leads the disgraced chairman out of the plane and into the hands of the waiting authorities. The crowd surges forward, but they don't attack. They simply watch as the old guard is marched away. Victoria takes Julian's hand, the two of them standing at the center of a world that has been reborn. The rain begins to fall again, but this time it feels like a cleansing, washing away the grease and blood. Julian looks at the terminal, seeing the first-class only signs being torn down by the cheering staff. He feels the weight of the last few days finally settling into his bones. A tired but peaceful ache. He has lost his fortune, his fleet, and his anonymity, but he has regained his humanity. The final confrontation is over, and the empire of glass has been replaced by a foundation of heart. "Let's go home, Victoria," Julian whispers, leaning his head against hers in the middle of the crowd. But even as they walk away, the screens in the terminal flicker with a new mysterious countdown. The morning sun rises over a terminal that no longer feels like a cold temple of wealth. Julian stands by the gate, his arm in a sling, and his charcoal hoodie replaced by a simple jacket. The first-class lounge has been cleared of its velvet ropes and replaced with play areas for children. Staff members who once sneered now greet every passenger with the warmth of a shared victory. Julian watches as the young mother from the crash boards a new flight, her ticket personally signed by him. He is no longer the CEO of a shadow empire, but the steward of a community that found its voice. Victoria stands beside him, her hand tucked into his, her eyes finally free of the shadows of grief. They are traveling light today, just two people going to see a father who waited through the storm. The airline has been restructured as a worker-owned cooperative, a legacy of the revolution they led. Julian breathes in the scent of jet fuel and hope, knowing the sky finally belongs to everyone. Marcus stands at the security podium, not as a supervisor, but as a trainee in the humanity program. He meets Julian's eyes and offers a somber, respectful nod. A man working to earn back his soul. The legal battles against Sterling are over, the chairman now facing a lifetime behind iron bars. Julian's phone pings, but the alerts are no longer from angry board members or frantic stockbrokers. They are messages of gratitude from across the globe. A billion digital voices celebrating a new era. He looks at the departure board, which now lists flights to cities he once deemed unprofitable. The empathy engine is running at full capacity, proving that kindness is the most stable currency. Victoria leans her head on his shoulder, the two of them watching the first flight of the day take off. The roar of the engines is a song of freedom, a sound that no longer carries the weight of secrets. But as the plane disappears into the clouds, the airport's main display screen suddenly glitches. A jagged red symbol appears on every digital surface in the terminal, a stylized eye inside a gear. The countdown Julian saw earlier has reached its final minute, the numbers pulsing like a heartbeat. "Julian, what is that?" Victoria asks, her grip on his hand tightening as the lights begin to flicker. Julian recognizes the symbol from the encrypted files he recovered from Sterling's private vault. It is the mark of the Pantheon, a global cabal that funded Smith Global and a dozen other giants. They are the ones who truly own the sky, and they do not take the loss of a puppet lightly. The countdown hits 0, and every plane on the tarmac suddenly powers on its engines simultaneously. There are no pilots in the cockpits. The aircraft are being controlled by a remote external ghost. Julian realizes his victory was only the first battle in a much larger global war for the truth. The ghost of the system is back, and it has hijacked the very fleet he just tried to save. A voice echoes through the PA system, distorted and mechanical, chilling the blood of everyone in the terminal. "You dismantled a board, Julian Smith, but you cannot dismantle a world order," the voice intones. The grounded planes begin to taxi toward the runway in a perfect, terrifyingly synchronized line. They aren't preparing for takeoff. They are positioning themselves to block every exit from the city. Julian pulls out his phone, but the device is immediately fried by a localized electromagnetic pulse. The terminal doors lock automatically, the biometric scanners turning red as they recognize his face. The Pantheon has declared him a threat to the global equilibrium, and the hunt has begun again. Victoria looks at Julian, the piece they just found shattering like glass under a hammer. "We aren't going to my father's today, are we?" she asks, her voice steady despite the chaos. Julian shakes his head, his eyes fixing on a hidden maintenance hatch in the floor. "They want a war, Victoria? Then we'll give them one that spans every terminal on the map." He turns to the crowd of passengers and staff, who are looking to him for one last command. "Grab your phones, record everything, and don't let them turn off the light," Julian shouts. The people respond with a roar, a sea of glowing screens rising to meet the technological darkness. Julian and Victoria dive into the maintenance tunnels, the underground heart of the airport they know so well. They are no longer fighting for an airline. They are fighting for the soul of a connected world. The sequel hook is set. The King of the Skies is now the General of the Underground. As they disappear into the dark, the mysterious keyword for the next chapter of their life flashes on his mind. If you want to see Julian take on the global cabal, like and subscribe to witness the resistance. Comment the word Pantheon below if you are ready for the next part of this journey.